Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site, bettingangle.us, a free site. It's December 14th, 2023. Let's talk boxing. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, you have a couple of fights happening this weekend that are must watch, right? You have two of boxing's most intriguing fighters, right? Who the public does not quite know about. In other words, these guys aren't as popular as they should be for different reasons. Let's talk about the first guy. Years ago, I was watching a fight on HBO, and HBO used to be corporate, right? You know, you definitely got the feeling that there was an expectation that the fighters were going to come across like efficient employees. So a guy named Roy Jones was in the ring, and Jones was at the top of his game, right? This was the Roy Jones era. And Jones's guy was a few feet away from him, and Jones hurried over to him in an exaggerated way where Jones looked like he was stepping over to him in some kind of burlesque type step. And Larry Merchant, longtime boxing guy, excellent boxing commentator, but a corporate guy, right? Larry Merchant turned to Jim Lampley, his partner at the time, and he said, "I don't understand this. What is Roy Jones doing?" Right? The answer would be obvious to Sonny Edwards. Sonny Edwards is the IBF flyweight champion. Let me just point out, Sonny Edwards is the best showman in boxing. Right? This is a guy who just feels it. In the ring, he's just ahead of the crowd in terms of posing and framing what he's doing, letting you know the other guy can't touch him. Right? Now, I'm not saying he's the only showman. Right? Billy Joe Saunders on some nights was just downright charismatic. Right? His fight against David Lemieux, Saunders realized he was just too slick, just too fast for Lemieux, and he let you and the crowd share in the excitement. Right? There are other guys. James Toney, retired now. But when James Toney got on a roll, you knew, because Toney would start making faces. I'm not kidding. Right? He would be in their world-class fight, world-class competition, and James Toney would be making the other guy miss. Then he'd be making faces. Right? He'd be, leaning on the other side. The guy would miss. He'd make faces. Toney is making faces during his fight against Evander Holyfield. Now, what Sonny Edwards does is Sonny has great feet. Sonny can break rhythm. In other words, those fights where the other guy looks pinned outside, we'll call the other guy David Dubois or someone like that, Daniel Dubois. Sonny Edwards is never pinned anywhere. Right? He always can break stride, get out of a rhythm that's not working for him, and get into a different rhythm. Now, he's fighting Bam Rodriguez. I owe my pay customers this fight, right? I've made a video already for them. I can't predict a winner here in this video. What I'm trying to do here is to tip off the public to really a great fight. Bam Rodriguez, who is trained by Robert Garcia. This is some of Garcia's best work right now. Bam Rodriguez is a hardworking guy. He's determined. He's a very skilled guy. Right? He's a young guy who is beyond his years. But understand, he doesn't have the imagination that a Sonny Edwards has, that a Roy Jones had, right? He's just not the kind of guy who in the middle of a fight is going to start pushing the envelope, right? Is going to understand, hey, I have the edge here, and I'm going to let the fans join in and see my edge, share my joy, right? He's just not that guy. You know the mindset that had Ray Leonard throwing a bolo punch. Sonny Edwards has that mindset. Now, we neglect the lighter weights. I'm sure I lost half the crowd here the minute I said flyweight, right? That's the way it goes. But if you're just into boxing, regardless of weight, this guy really is a pleasure to watch. Bam Rodriguez, who is high volume, is going to have to try to impose himself on Sonny Edwards, right? He can't allow slow moments in this fight, because if he does, you're going to realize that there's a charisma gap here, right? I've always said that the difference between Ray Leonard and Floyd Mayweather, besides the fact that Ray's a combination puncher, Floyd is a pot shotter, right? Floyd much better defensively than Ray, right? Floyd, incredibly fast hands, but Ray comes across as having the faster hands because Ray actually would throw combinations. But the big difference between them, and I mean this, the big difference was charisma, right? Ray would enter the ring. Understand, guys with charisma, I know Floyd would enter the ring, he'd be wearing Mexican garb, and, Floyd has a big persona, right? But just understand, charisma is very different than that. A Ray Leonard can enter the ring and, have the afro just right, have the interesting robe on, have the corner, right? Ray was with Angelo Dundee, right? Look at the crowd. That was a Ray Leonard staple, right? He'd look at the crowd. He would just give you the impression that you were there with him, even when he's fighting. Name the fighter: Benitez, Duran, Hagler, Hearns, right? And, I'm just telling you, before punches were thrown, you thought you were on Team Leonard, right? Ali would be in the ring with great fighters, right? Understand, Frazier, 64 Olympic champion. Foreman, 68 Olympic champion. In other words, these guys, when he fights Frazier has the heavyweight title, right? I know the Ali people will say, hey, how could Ali not have had the title when he was unbeaten at the time and he had won the championship? Look, Ali had been stripped. Well, understand, he doesn't even have that defense when he fights Foreman, and Foreman has the heavyweight title. I mean, in other words, Ali's fighting fellow Olympians who have the title. But yet there's a charisma gap in both fights, right? Ali comes in first round of the first Frazier fight. They hit Ali, Joe Frazier hits Ali in the jaw, and Ali shakes his head to the crowd to let the crowd know that Frazier's left hook wasn't going to stop him. Of course, he was wrong on that, and you and I knew he was bluffing. Right, he got hit. You thought, oh, Ali got hit flush with that shot, and then he's shaking his head to the crowd, right? Well, that's the Sonny Edwards show, right? Sonny is going to give you the impression that he's in complete control. You know what they say about the Ali Frazier first fight, right? Ali says, don't you know you're in here with God, he says to Joe Frazier. And Frazier supposedly responds, well, God's going to get his ass whipped tonight. Right? That's the aura Sonny Edwards gives. Right? It's worth the price of admission. This is a must-watch fight. Sonny against unbeaten Bam Rodriguez. This is a title unification. Now let's talk about one of the great mysteries. And it's a mystery. You're talking about 9 or so pro fights. Great amateur. Former Cuban champion. Who's being overlooked in a lot of conversations. The guy's name is David Morrell. He's been calling out David Benavidez, for crying out loud. Now, Benavidez understands that a guy named Canelo has a much bigger public profile, would do more for Benavidez's reputation than a David Morrell. Right? So Benavidez, who, let's face it too, is taking tough fights, right? Caleb Plant, he shifts gears, Demetrius Andrade. Right now he wants Canelo. In fact, he's always wanted Canelo, but he'll take tough fights on the way to getting Canelo. Right? Benavidez is focused on Canelo. Terence Crawford is focused on Canelo. Another mystery in the sport, not a mystery to me. In fact, he is the best at 160 pounds. Janibek wants Canelo. No one's calling out David Morrell. Right now, just understand, this guy might be the next big thing in boxing. Right? You see his fights, the guy looks spectacular. He's a southpaw. He's young. He's a knockout puncher. Right? He has the amateur pedigree. Quite frankly, there are a lot of similarities between this guy and Alexander Usyk. Right? But Usyk, let's understand what got Usyk to the top of the mountain. They had a tournament at cruiserweight that forced other champs like Maris Briedis to fight Alexander Usyk. Usyk was the guy who won that tournament. Right now, there is no tournament, unfortunately, at 168 right now. Right? Also, it's even worse than that. Demetrius Andrade, and I know this is going to shake some people, but he's one of the best in the sport today. Right? In terms of talent, folks, he's there. His big enemy is time, because he's in his mid-30s. But in terms of talent, Andrade's there. Right? Andrade lost to Benavidez. Why? Because Benavidez is a monster. Right? That's why, when two excellent guys fight each other, hey, an excellent guy's going to lose. Well, I was hoping Andrade would stick around 168. Andrade instead's going back to 160. Before I got excited and thought, oh man, is he going to fight Janibek? Another guy who, to me, is among the very best in the sport. Right? Common sense kicked in. I heard in an interview Andrade talk about wanting to fight Erislandy Lara. Obviously, there's a PBC component to the middleweight division. Let me just point out, Jamal Charlo, Erislandy Lara, I don't consider either of them on par with Janibek. Right? Just one man's opinion, but, there'll be others. But let's just say I'm positive that Andrade, who again I consider to be one of the best in the sport, is going to take the long way to fighting Janibek. Right? In other words, he wants to, pick up titles at 160. He's not going to start at Janibek. He's going to take the long way. Well, let's just say nobody's starting at Morrell, who has a share of the title. Right? It's a minor title at 168, but no one wants to fight David Morrell. He is fighting Agbeko, who's a KO puncher, who's going to be upright and right in front of him, who's going to be daring Morrell, himself a KO puncher, to trade. Morrell is going to have to be extremely careful here. He's actually going to have to show you non-bully skills. In other words, boxing skills, where he engages this slugger but doesn't make it a shootout, because you don't want to be in a shootout with a gunslinger. So I hope boxing fans understand you got some great fights coming up. And I'm not even talking about the heavyweight card that's going to pop up later this month that really is historical to me. Right? I can't believe how many good fights they have on that card. Right? It's as if someone actually decided to listen to the matchmaker and make daring, bold fights in which both guys are in danger. Well, just understand, the fun starts with Sonny Edwards against Bam Rodriguez. This December, this month, I'm talking about right now, you're going to be treated to a series of fights involving some very high-level, talented guys in the sport with very varied styles. Right? It's unclear to me whether Sonny Edwards can crack an egg. He's not a puncher. But it's also unclear to me whether anyone can beat Sonny Edwards by decision. Let me just point out, David Morrell can certainly crack an egg and probably damage parts of your kitchen. Right? This guy hits very hard. Let's see how he responds when he's not perhaps the hardest puncher in the fight. Right? Understand Morrell's talent level. One floor up is Arthur Beterbiev. Dmitry Bivol. By the way, Bivol's on the card from Riyadh later this month. That's how loaded the card is. And he's fighting former champion Lyndon Arthur. Right? But understand, you have sluggers. Callum Smith's about to fight Arthur Beterbiev. It might shock some people, but Beterbiev in the amateurs was the person who came up with the idea of getting up close to Alexander Usyk and going to Usyk's body. Right? Beterbiev, the 175-pounder, has stated that he's willing to fight Usyk professionally if they can do so at a catch weight. Now, it might be wishful thinking at this point. Right? But just understand, you have sluggers. Here's the problem. Morrell's in his 20s. Boxing's a young man's game. Beterbiev is well into his 30s. He's several years older than 33-year-old Callum Smith. Right, folks? I'm just telling you, if Morrell gets shut out at 168, because Canelo has a full dance card, has huge paydays if he looks left or right. I think a Canelo-Crawford fight is interesting. Just look at Crawford's KO percentage. Folks, it's in the 70s. Understand, too, Canelo is a guy who has been fighting guys who are bigger than him physically. Now, while Canelo certainly outweighs Terence Crawford, and while the idea of fighters jumping several weight classes has been hurt somewhat by the Charlo showing, right, you understand that it's a Crawford, a guy who fights differently every fight, who would keep Canelo guessing. And given Crawford's punching power, let's call it what it is, right? No one has been upright against Crawford or has stayed upright for several years. That's an intriguing fight, right? Who could blame Canelo? If Canelo says, you know what, I'm going to fight Crawford, then I'm going to pivot, I'm going to fight Benavidez, right? Folks who know who David Morrell is would say, hey, what about our guy? Folks who know who Janabek is will say, hey, what about our guy? They're going to get drowned out. You have an opportunity in a few days to see David Morrell for yourself. Take advantage of the opportunity. Let me add one more fact, too. It's extremely intriguing, and I mean extremely intriguing, when you have a showman right? Chris Eubank, the father, right? Not the son, but the father. When you have a showman who's fighting in front of a crowd that isn't his crowd, right? Sonny Edwards in Phoenix, just the idea of it is crazy, right? I'm guessing it's going to be a hardcore Bam Rodriguez crowd, right? That's just a guess, right? Just understand, you're going to have Edwards there firmly convinced that he could not only outbox Bam Rodriguez, but he can pose while doing so, right? He's going to be putting on a show in front of people who will want a show from the other guy, right? High drama, high stakes. Anyway, take a look at both of those fights, folks. There are certain events where the sport exceeds itself. I think Edwards Rodriguez is going to be one of those events. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this video. Let me also point out the problem with Showman. And it's a big problem, right? You have Pernell Whitaker thinking he's putting on a show, the consummate show, against Oscar De La Hoya, to the point where, after Pernell loses that fight, by decision, Pernell purchases a page in the LA Times and has an article addressed to Oscar that says, Oscar, you and I both know I won that fight. Right? Oscar De La Hoya thought he was putting on a show the last 3 rounds against Felix Trinidad. Both were unbeaten at the time. When they announced that Oscar lost that fight, Oscar was stunned. Oscar, in an interview, said that he thought he was giving Trinidad a boxing lesson. Right? The problem with Showman is sometimes they lose the room. Right? The guy is so in his head. You look at the Pernell Whitaker Oscar fight, there are stretches of that fight. Pernell's putting on a defensive masterpiece, no question about it. But boxing has an offensive side. There's stretches of that fight where Pernell does not throw punches. Right? With Sonny Edwards, the question is going to be, is he going to do enough punching to win over the crowd and to win rounds? Right? That's a huge question. We'll get the answer within the next few days. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section of this video. Let me point out too, and I mean this, I've seen fights where it's clear to me one guy has dominated the fight. Right? Pernell Whitaker against Julio Cesar Chavez. Right? Understand, Chavez had dropped Meldrick Taylor in the closing seconds of a fight. Taylor got off the canvas in real time on the telecast. They said if Taylor gets off the canvas, he wins the fight. Because even a ref concerned with fighter safety would realize that Chavez didn't have enough time to come across the ring to land on Meldrick Taylor. Right? Meldrick Taylor makes it off the canvas. He's even more lucid than you thought he would be. Richard Steele stops the fight. Right? One of those memorable, crazy stoppages that have people on both sides of the aisle on it. Right? Well, understand, Chavez is fighting Pernell Whitaker. If you believe... If you were there watching Pernell the whole fight and you understood what he was trying to do, if you were brought into his world in that fight, it doesn't get much better than the 12th round, where Chavez tries to make a run at Pernell. Pernell looks at him, Pernell shakes his head no, and Pernell waves at him. Folks, that's the sport at the highest level. That's showmanship at the highest level. What did it get Purnell? It got him a draw in a fight that many, myself included, thought he dominated. Take a look at Sonny Edwards. Ask yourself during the fight, is what he's doing translating to the judges? Right? That's a question showmen have to be ready to answer. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I look forward to your comments. Thanks for stopping by.